Mark Wahlberg stepped onto the stage of The View, expecting nothing more than the usual promotional interview for his latest film. He had been on the show before, sat through the routine questions, smiled for the cameras, and made his exit. But this time, something was different. The energy in the air was thick, charged with an unspoken tension, and as Mark walked out, it was clear that the usual flow of the show was about to get disrupted. Before we begin, subscribe us. The applause filled the room as he shook hands with the co-hosts, his confident, easy smile putting on a show of ease. But he could feel the weight of the moment hanging over him. He could tell that Joy Behar, ever the provocateur, was ready to throw down. She was the first to speak as he settled into his chair, her grin already hinting at a challenge. "Mark Wahlberg, welcome back to The View," she said, her voice cool and collected, though her eyes glinted with something sharper. "We're excited to have you here to promote your latest film." Mark nodded, giving his usual pleasant response. "Thanks, Joy. It's always a pleasure to be here," he said, trying to keep things light. But Joy wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. She tilted her head slightly, the smile still playing on her lips but carrying a sharp edge now. "Well, you've had quite the career, haven't you, Mark? Tell me, would you call yourself an accomplished actor?" The question hung in the air for a moment and Mark blinked. It wasn't a typical softball question, and the audience seemed to catch the tension immediately. Mark's smile stayed in place, but the edge in his voice grew more defined. "I've been fortunate, worked hard, and I'm proud of the projects I've been part of," he replied, doing his best to stay calm. Joy's laugh cut through the air, loud and dismissive. "Fortunate? Or just playing the same tough guy from Boston in every movie? Honestly, if you've seen one Mark Wahlberg performance, you've seen them all." The room fell silent, and the discomfort in the air was palpable. Mark's jaw tightened, but he refused to let the barb hit him. Instead, he folded his hands on the table and let out a slow, controlled breath. "Well, Joy," he began, his tone measured, "I would argue that each character I play has depth. If you're really paying attention..." "Oh, I'm paying attention," Joy shot back, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "I just haven't seen any depth. All your characters are either angry cops, angry soldiers, or angry boxers. At some point, you've got to admit you're just playing yourself." There it was. The challenge had been thrown. Mark straightened up slightly in his seat, eyes locked on hers. Whoopi, sitting nearby, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, sensing the rising tension. But Joy was on a roll, and nothing was going to stop her now. Mark took a deep breath, feeling his patience stretch. "If that's your opinion, Joy, you're entitled to it. But I think the millions of people who watch my films and relate to them might disagree with you." Joy's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, clearly itching for another round. "Ah yes, the relatable everyman," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The working class hero who owns mansions in Beverly Hills and wears $1,000 suits. How's that for relatable?" Mark allowed himself a brief chuckle, but his eyes didn't smile. Instead, they betrayed a simmering irritation. "I haven't forgotten where I came from, Joy," he replied, his Boston accent slipping through slightly. "You can be successful and still stay true to your roots." Joy wasn't done yet. "Oh, please," she scoffed, arms folding across her chest. "You're as Hollywood as they come. You make millions pretending to struggle while real people out there are actually fighting for something. You don't speak for the working class anymore. You left that behind years ago." The room fell silent. The intensity of the exchange was undeniable. The studio audience seemed to hold its collective breath, sensing that this wasn't just a debate about acting or fame. It was about something deeper, something more personal. Mark's fist clenched under the table, his face now holding a hint of emotion he had been trying to keep hidden. "Now, that's a hell of an assumption, Joy," Mark said, his voice low and deliberate. "You don't know me. You don't know where I came from." Joy, ever the sharp-tongued host, leaned back in her chair, her expression smug. "Maybe not," she replied coolly, "but I know what I see, and what I see is a man who cashed in his street cred for a big paycheck, forgot where he came from, and stopped fighting for anything that actually matters." At this, Mark's expression shifted. The years of hard work, the struggle to break out of Boston, the public image carefully crafted, it all seemed to boil down to this one moment. A moment when Joy's words, meant to jab and provoke, struck a nerve. "You've got a lot to say about me, Joy," he said slowly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity now. But it sounds more like you're talking about yourself. The audience gasped. Even the co-hosts seemed taken aback by the force of Mark's words. Joy's cheeks flushed red, and for the first time in the conversation, she was caught off guard. Her arms uncrossed, and she leaned forward, her voice growing sharper. "Oh, trust me, Mark," she said, her tone threatening. "We'll get to me, but right now, we're talking about you, and I'm not done yet." Mark didn't flinch. He didn't back down. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes narrowing just enough to reveal the quiet storm beneath the surface. "Neither am I," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. The commercial break came, and the tension in the air was nearly unbearable. The studio audience murmured, unsure of what to make of the confrontation they had just witnessed. Mark Wahlberg, Hollywood's tough guy, had just gone toe-to-toe with one of the most outspoken personalities on TV, and neither had flinched. As the lights came back up, the cameras rolled again, and Mark sat in his chair, his hands now clasped in front of him, his posture straight. He was in control now, but the weight of the argument still hung in the room like a live wire. Joy, not one to shy away from a confrontation, was ready to continue the fight. "So, Mark," she began, her voice sweet but laced with venom, "you claim to be all about authenticity, but tell me, how authentic can you really be when you're standing here, a multi-millionaire actor in a designer suit, talking about your humble beginnings like they somehow still define you?" Mark took a deep breath, his Boston accent growing more pronounced as he responded, "I'm not denying where I came from. I worked hard to get where I am, and I've been lucky, but I haven't forgotten what it's like to struggle. I don't just talk about my roots for the cameras. They're a part of me, always will be." Joy didn't let up. "But the struggle you talk about is long gone, Mark. You're a product of Hollywood now, and no amount of real you try to sell will ever change that. What makes you different from the very people you criticize?" Mark's hands tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. "I don't criticize anyone. I don't pretend to be something I'm not, but I've built a career on staying grounded and working hard. And yes, I'm successful now, but success doesn't mean I've lost touch with who I am." The back and forth continued, each exchange becoming more personal, the lines between Mark's on-screen persona and his real-life self blurring. Joy, ever the provocateur, wasn't satisfied. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You claim to be the working-class hero, Mark, but what have you really done for the people you claim to represent? You act like your films are some kind of tribute to the struggling man, but I don't see you doing anything to change the system. You're part of the problem, not the solution." Mark's eyes flickered with a mixture of frustration and understanding. "It's not about changing the system, Joy. It's about showing people they can rise up, that they can fight and still succeed. Not everyone gets the opportunity to break free, but that doesn't mean they're any less deserving of the chance." Joy's eyes were cold now, and she pressed on, determined to have the last word. "But you had your chance, Mark. You made it. And now you stand here telling the world that anything is possible, while the rest of us deal with the reality of what actually is. It's easy to preach when you've already won." The audience waited for Mark's response. The tension was palpable. His hands gripped the edge of the table as he met Joy's gaze. "You don't get it, do you, Joy?" he said quietly. "It's not about winning. It's about staying true to who you are, no matter how far you go. That's the struggle." And with that, the show moved into the final segment, but the battle between Mark Wahlberg and Joy Behar would leave a lasting impression, one that would linger far beyond the commercial breaks. The final segment was meant to be a wrap-up, a smooth transition from the heat of their debate to the usual lighthearted banter that The View was known for. But neither Mark nor Joy were ready to let it go. The atmosphere in the studio felt like it was still crackling with tension. The co-hosts sat on edge, unsure whether they should step in or let the two continue to spar. Whoopi, ever the mediator, exchanged a glance with Sunny, both of them sensing that this wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was something deeper, something personal. Joy, her arms still folded tightly across her chest, shot one more look at Mark. "You really think you're better than me, don't you?" she asked, her tone laced with both irritation and challenge. You come here, play the humble tough guy act, but I'm seeing right through it. All these years of pretending to be something you're not, it's all part of the game, and you've played it so well. Mark's face tightened, but his voice was steady, almost calm now, as if he had steeled himself for whatever was coming next. You think I've forgotten the fight, Joy? You think just because I made it big, I've turned my back on where I came from? I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone, but don't sit there and tell me I don't get it. You don't know what it took to get here. The room seemed to shrink in on itself. The cameras, the lights, the audience. It was all a distant hum now. It was just the two of them, each with their own sense of pride, their own story, and their own version of truth. The conversation had long passed beyond film or fame. It had become about identity, about perceptions, and about what it really means to succeed. Joy leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving Mark. I don't think you're better than me, Mark, she said slowly, but I do think you've convinced yourself that you're some kind of beacon of hope for the working class. And that's where you're wrong. The people I know, the real fighters out there, they don't need your brand of redemption. They need action. They need someone who isn't just talking about their struggle, but actually living it day in and day out. Mark shook his head, a wry smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. You know, Joy, I don't need to wear my struggle on my sleeve. My life's not some charity case to parade around. I've worked to get where I am. I haven't had everything handed to me, and I sure as hell don't expect anyone to give me anything now, but the least I can do is show people that it's possible to rise above where you come from, without forgetting it. Joy, sensing that Mark had struck a nerve, sat back slightly. There was a flicker of respect in her eyes, though she quickly masked it with a smirk. Maybe so, Mark, but at the end of the day, your movies aren't changing the world. They're just a reflection of a system that keeps people like me and people like you playing by its rules. Mark paused for a moment, his brow furrowing. I don't think I'm here to change the world, Joy, but I do think I can show people that it's okay to keep fighting for what they want. You might not see the depth in the characters I play, but I see it, and I think that's what counts. Maybe you've been in this game so long, you've forgotten what it's like to have to fight for something real, to be someone real. The words hung in the air between them, neither one willing to back down. There was a long silence before Joy, breaking it with a sharp breath, muttered, "You've got a way with words, Mark. I'll give you that." Mark gave a half smile, leaning back slightly in his chair. And you've got a way with throwing punches, Joy, but that's the thing about this business. You can hit, but you've also got to take the hits. For a moment, the audience could hear the faint murmur of approval, like they were waiting for the next dramatic punchline. But Mark had delivered his final strike, not with words, but with an understanding that left Joy speechless, if only for a split second. The studio lights seemed to brighten just a little, and the co-hosts, Whoopi, Sunny, and Sarah, shifted in their seats. The moment had passed, but the tension lingered, still thick in the air. They had witnessed something few had expected, not just a battle of personalities, but a clash of values and identities that transcended the show itself. Whoopi, sensing the end of the confrontation, leaned forward with a grin. Well, that was something. Always interesting, Mark, having you here. We'll wrap up with a quick question. What's next for you after this movie? Mark, finally able to loosen up, shot a playful glance at Whoopi. I'm just going to keep doing what I do, working, staying true to my roots, and, taking it one step at a time. Joy let out a quiet laugh, perhaps realizing that this wasn't a fight she would win today, but she had definitely made her point. She tilted her head, giving Mark one last look. Well, Mark, whatever works for you. The camera zoomed out as the hosts moved on to the next segment, but the lingering tension didn't fade immediately. The audience clapped, their cheers mixed with whispers and knowing glances. They had just witnessed a rare live television moment, one that would no doubt fuel debates for days to come. As the credits rolled, the stage was still charged, as if the energy from Mark and Joy's exchange would echo far beyond the studio walls. Both had made their marks, and in that moment, it was clear. They had each left an imprint on the other, and on everyone watching. In the end, they may have disagreed on many things, but one thing was certain. They had each shown what it meant to stand firm in their beliefs and to fight for what they thought was true. The show wrapped up with the usual upbeat music and the familiar faces of the View co-hosts waving at the camera. But inside the studio, the undercurrent of what had transpired remained palpable. The audience had seen something real, something raw. It wasn't just another celebrity interview, it was a confrontation that cut through the gloss of Hollywood and media personas. It was a clash between two personalities that represented very different sides of the world. Mark Wahlberg, the Hollywood A-lister with his working-class roots, and Joy Behar, the outspoken commentator who wasn't afraid to call out the hypocrisy she saw in the system. As the audience filed out of the studio, they spoke in hushed tones, recounting the tension. Some people had been firmly on Mark's side, arguing that he had handled himself with grace and dignity, refusing to be cornered into a defensive position. Others sided with Joy, seeing her as the voice of the everyday person, calling out the elites for their pretensions. But no one could deny one thing: what had just happened was not your average television moment. It was a storm that had brewed between two strong-willed people, and for those who had witnessed it, it was unforgettable. Backstage, the atmosphere was more relaxed, but there was still an air of quiet reflection. Whoopi Goldberg walked up to Mark, her face serious, but her eyes glimmered with admiration. "You held your ground, Mark," she said with a half smile. "Not easy to do with, Joy." Mark chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't expect that. Thought I was just coming in to talk about a movie, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes. You never really know what you're walking into with her, do you?" Whoopi quipped, her tone lightening. "She's got a way of making it personal." Mark nodded. "Yeah, I figured, but honestly, it was intense. And maybe that's not a bad thing. People need to see real conversations, not just the glossy version of who we are." "True," Whoopi agreed. "It's not easy to get real in a place like this, especially when everyone expects you to play the role. But you didn't shy away." As Mark listened, he realized that this conversation, this heated moment, might be the most real he'd ever been on TV. The walls of Hollywood, the persona he had carefully crafted over the years, had cracked, revealing something more honest, something raw, and that, more than anything, might have been the point of the whole ordeal. It wasn't just about who could argue better or who could outwit the other. It was about showing a side of himself that was far from perfect, but far more human. Meanwhile, Joy Behar sat in her dressing room, reflecting on the exchange. She wasn't one to back down easily, and she knew she had pushed Mark hard, but even she couldn't help but admire his composure. Mark had taken her jabs, thrown some back, but never lost control. It was a rare trait in the entertainment world, where everything was so carefully curated. In her eyes, he might be a product of Hollywood, but there was something undeniably real about how he handled himself. "Didn't expect him to push back like that," Joy muttered to herself, staring into the mirror. "He's tougher than I thought." She had to admit, though, that part of her respect came from the fact that Mark had stood up for something. Maybe he wasn't the working-class hero that some wanted him to be, but he was still a product of those roots. He hadn't let the bright lights of Hollywood erase that. In Joy's world, that counted for something, even if she wouldn't admit it on air. As the credits for The View rolled on TV screens across the country, the reactions poured in. Social media exploded with hot takes and commentary. Some applauded Mark for standing firm, while others criticized him for not doing enough to address the points Joy raised. But more than anything, people were talking. It was the kind of moment that sparked conversation, divided opinions, and, most importantly, made people think about the real issues beneath the surface. Mark Wahlberg's PR team had already prepared a statement for the press. "I have always respected Joy's perspective, and while we might not agree on everything, the conversation today was an important one. I'm proud of where I come from and proud of the work I do. It's all part of my journey." It wasn't the most groundbreaking response, but it was safe, clean, and left the door open for future conversations. But in the back of his mind, Mark knew that nothing he could say would erase what had happened on that stage. It wasn't just a debate, it was a test of who he really was, and for once, he had let people see the full picture. Later that evening, as he sat with his family at home, Mark reflected on the day. His kids were playing in the background, his wife by his side, and for the first time in a while, he felt at peace with the whole thing. The interview had been uncomfortable, yes, but it had been a reminder of who he was, where he came from, and the fight that had brought him to this point. There would be more interviews, more promotions, and more scripted moments ahead, but he knew this would stick with him. The world had seen a piece of the real Mark Wahlberg, someone who had fought hard, not just for fame, but for respect. It wasn't about winning a fight with Joy Behar or anyone else. It was about standing tall in the face of pressure, about proving that you could be successful and still stay grounded in the values that shaped you. For Joy, the day hadn't ended in victory, but she had made her point. She had stirred the pot, pushed Mark to reveal a little more of himself, and in the process, reminded him of the divide that existed between Hollywood and the people. It often forgot. Was she right in her accusations? Maybe. But in the end, she had to acknowledge that Mark's story, whatever it was his to tell. And as much as she'd poked at him, she couldn't deny that he'd earned the right to tell it. If you like this video, then subscribe.